Okay, good afternoon to everyone. And I am so glad that TRC agreed to do this big book. And the reason why did I give it, I don't know. But I suppose I saw the ad saying that this is a 20th anniversary edition which has been published. And I thought that we should read it. I had read this book, I think 10 years ago. My son has these weird books on economics, and there's a very interesting book, which I'm sure Iftikhar has read, The Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which I think we should read one day. And so this book had fascinated me, and I thought that, we do read, we mainly read novels, but I think and translations, yes, novels in English, not translated novels. But I thought that this book had something important to say, and I wanted others to read it. And I am so glad that many of you did read it. It's also available as a documentary, a National Geographic documentary, which I think some of you did see. The documentary, the last part of the documentary is a little different. And if there is time, we'll talk about that. So let me begin. I don't usually talk, but I think this time I will talk. Geography was one of the subjects in school which I disliked intensely. You know, I didn't like drawing the map of East Pakistan at all. Um, and then, what is the importance of geography? Now, of course, we know it is very, very important. We talk about environmental studies, and Jared Diamond is, among other things, a geographer. He's a professor of geography at UCLA. And just to start off the meeting, he talks about the importance of geography on agriculture, on the domestication of animals, on writing, to the development of civilizations. And then he talks about how guns, germs, and steel have been used for conquest. His focus is on the European impact on the Americas in the West and Australasia on the East. But he says nothing about why the British were able to colonize India. Of course, one of the facts we know from other sources is that Britain had travelers, spies, you can call them, who came to India. So they knew what the people and culture were like, and so could conquer India easily. The late Imtiaz Habib had a brilliant paper on Ralph Fish, who visited India in 1583 and spent 8 years in India, most of his time in Bengal, learning about the riches of India and about the habits of Indians. And it was therefore very easy afterwards for the East India Company to enter, and and of course we know where that led to. There's one other point that I would like to raise here. In the time of COVID, the explanation of transmission of diseases from animals to humans and how human beings, long exposed to certain animals, developed immunities which North Americans, South Americans, or the African tribes in South Africa did not have. This is very important. And more than guns, more than steel, it was germs which conquered the Americas for the Europeans. And of course, the question that Diamond asks is why did Europe develop these weapons, and why wasn't it the other way around?
Around, yeah.
And one of the questions, of course, I will ask, and then I'll stop. One of the questions that Diamond does not ask is why do some nations feel obliged to conquer others? Why do they want more cargo? The word that Yali uses in the book. We understand it is avarice, we understand it is lust for gold, but why do some nations have that and other nations don't? So I will stop there and I will invite Shireen to speak. Please keep an eye on the time. I mean, I think if you speak for 15 minutes, it would be of help. Yeah. And then it will give enough time for others who did not volunteer to speak to join in later. Comments are welcome, but maybe we go up to Iftikhar because Iftikhar wants to leave, and then we can open the floor for comments and then go on to other speakers. So I am switching my mic off.
Okay. Thank you.
About the time limit. About the time limit.
Sorry, what about the time limit?
About the time limit, I mean, up till how many minutes should we?
15.
How many minutes?
I think if you keep 15 minutes each, we should
it's
be
more than enough.
15
more
minutes?
than enough.
Yeah.
More than enough.
More than enough, yeah. Okay. This is very vast. Okay, thank you so much. Can everybody hear me? Okay, first of all, I would like to say that reading this book was, it was an incredible experience. And when every time I ended a chapter and I put the book down for the day, it was like gasping for air afterwards because, you know, when I was reading it, I was like totally immersed in it. He's got the depth and breadth of the knowledge that Diamond has passed on is vast, and the questions that he has raised remain a challenge. One does not have to agree with his opinion, but the book leaves the mind, I would describe it as it leaves the mind hyperactive with the writing, because there are a series of questions that he answers and then that he doesn't answer, or that he raises. Very briefly, if possible, the book was brought about by a question from Yali, a local politician in New Guinea, where Diamond was working for several years, who asked Diamond, why is it that you white people developed so much cargo and brought it to New Guinea when we black people had little cargo of our own? And obviously, when he was there and he was seeing the vast differences between the Western world and the fact that they were almost in the Stone Age, all these questions came up. Diamond, he seeks to answer that query, not from a racist point of view, and I'll be very specific on that. It's obvious that he believes, you know, the American Constitution, all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. So he keeps to that fact that people are equal. So why is it that some people remain in the Stone Age and some people went into this space age while living exactly on the same earth? Taking the equality of man as his premise, Diamond examines in great detail the state of various geographic locations in the world and why some of them achieved the basics of survival earlier than others, and what geographic factors aided in their development. And he compares world history to an onion. You have to keep taking off the layers. History is not just one damn fact after the other. There really are broad patterns to history, and the search for their explanation is as productive as it is fascinating. I'll come to that towards the end. The time that he starts with is 11,000 BC. And of course, a lot of the earlier facts that he has mentioned change. Every time you discover a new skeleton or a new something in Israel or China, everything changes. But that's the date that corresponds to the beginning, roughly corresponds to the beginnings of village life in a few parts of the world. And then he calls it it was around that time that there was the undisputed peopling of the Americas, the end of the Pleistocene era and the last ice age, and the start of what the geologists term the recent era, which is the era we're living in. That some continents already have a head start on a clear advantage over people of other continents. And that's the theme that runs through the book. According to him, human history started off 50,000 years ago, the Great Leap Forward. Then he concludes, because he was very specific about Australia and New Guinea. That's where the question arose, so he's coming back to that. He concludes that the colonization of Australia and New Guinea was not achieved until around the Great Leap Forward. That's about 50,000 years ago. And if you've been to Australia and lived in Australia, you know that their lives, the Aborigines, the story of them is that they were arrived about 40,000 years ago. And strangely enough, the stories that they tell to each other down the road, down the years, without recorded, is the same as Adam and Eve, that one person came and the other person came out of the rib of the first person. He has what happened. I just run through briefly for those who haven't read through. What happened on all the continents before 11,000 BC. Then he talks about how geography molded societies on Polynesian islands. He's why the Inca emperor, just a minute. Why did people of, those are roughly the things. Why were people of some regions earlier able to domesticate plants and animals? Why were some large animals never domesticated? When you think about it, why was the elephant never domesticated? Okay, the cattle was, the horse was, the elephant was never domesticated. Used as a war, but not. Why did food production spread at different rates and different continents? And then he comes down from food to guns, germs, and steel, which was the three weapons that were used for colonization. The steel being the steel armor and the sword, and the germs, obviously, that they passed down. The evolution of germs, the evolution of writing, the evolution of technology, the evolution of government and religion, Australian and New Guinean history, East Asian history, Austronesian expansion, history of Eurasia and the Americas, and the history of Africa. And when you think about it, you know where Australia is based on the map, and the islands, and how far away they are from everything else. You have to ponder as to how it actually started. I found what was in this book, I found the most fascinating part was when the Spanish conquistadors takes over from the Inca emperor. And I know if any of you have studied, it was the same story that we were told, and people were reluctant to believe it was Bakhtiar Khilji and the 11 horsemen and the Muslim conquest of Bengal. Or you look at it in modern times and it's still the same. It's a group of American SEALs who come over and come inside a country and, change the government, whatever. So it is possible. But that was fascinating. It was really, and the fact is that those people were literate, so they recorded everything. He counts it, that was in 1532. And just before that, around the same time, as you mentioned, was the first visit by the Europeans to the court of Jahangir. So it was our time. And one thing, as he said, he doesn't mention, but like we all know, is that the fact that these people, the Europeans, went out conquering and they went out seafaring because of their cultural setup. In England, the second son did not inherit anything. The estate passed intact to the eldest son, which is why they had to find things for other people to do, for the other sons to do. And they made sure they financed them, and they went around looking for lands in other countries of the world or their fortune in other countries of the world, rather than disrupt their own society. So this is, and he said 168 Spanish soldiers and about 80,000 Incas, and they defeated them. And that was because they had the guns, and I guess they held. And then when he talks about the political development, he says the Incas were a very centralized authority. There was such a centralized authority that if the emperor, until and unless the emperor commanded them, they did not move. So they were just like sitting ducks and they wiped them out completely. This Atahuallah's capture entrusts us specifically in marking the decisive moment in the greatest collision of modern history, but it is also of more general interest because the factors that resulted in Pizarro seizing Atahualpa were essentially the same ones that determined the outcome of many similar collisions between colonizers and native peoples elsewhere in the world. Hence, Atahuallah capture offers us a broad window onto world history. That answers the question that you raised. How did the British, with hardly any, what? At the height of their power, they had, how many people did they have? How many soldiers did they have in England? Hardly anything. How many bureaucrats did they have? About 700 or 800, and they ruled India with that. Pizarro's, the Spanish military advantage lay in the Spanish steel swords and other weapons, steel armor, guns, and horses. To those weapons, Atahuallah's the Inca troops, without animals on which to ride into battle, could oppose only stone, bronze, or wooden club, maces, and hand axes, plus slingshots and quilted armor. Such imbalances of equipment were decisive in innumerable other confrontations of Europeans with Native Americans and other people. The novelty of horses' steel weapons doubtlessly paralyzed the Incas at Cajamarca, but the battles after fought against determined resistance by Inca armies. So they went on. I mean, once the Spanish had a footload and they had really in the country and a boatload of gold, everybody was getting rich. So their incentive to colonization was greater than anybody's hold on. He goes on, and it's so deep that I try to keep it as short as possible. He goes on to say that Yali's question, that why did the whites have so much and the New Guineans, people of New Guinea didn't? And he names 4 factors. And those factors briefly is the set of continental difference in the wild plant and animal species starting as materials for domestication initially. Because what you had initially was what you could build up on. So some people had more people for the Fertile Crescent and people in China, and other people had less. So if you had more, you started out with more. So not a question of race, not a question of the human intellect, which was the same, but what you actually got, which again, I would come and say was God gifted, but. And then the second, he says that those affecting rates of diffusion and migration. So how easily you could move about. Crops and livestock, for everything, how easily they could move about. Diffusion was slower in Africa, especially in the Americas, because of those continents' east-west major axis and geographical and ecological barriers. It was also difficult for traditional New Guinea, where rugged terrain and the long backbone of high mountains prevented any significant progress towards political and linguistic unification. Then the fourth and last set of factors consists of continental differences in area or total population size. The last that he mentions. The third that he mentions is that, domesticates and technology and how ease of intercontinental diffusion has varied because some continents are more isolated than others. So again, it's geography. And he defines these 4 sets of factors as the reason, very simplistically, as the reason why which some societies could grow at a faster rate than others. But he does not mention, he mentions the Chinese in comparison. He doesn't mention the Chinese specifically. He totally leaves out Mohenjo-daro, Harappa. So he concentrates entirely, or the entire Aryan migration, or even the Indo-Aryan script of languages. I went through that, he doesn't mention it. But so his comparison is with New Guinea on one side and with the Americas on the other side, and Australia and Australasia and Polynesia, and all those countries which were islands and which even to the 1800s, by the time New Zealand and Australia were being colonized, they were still very much behind. Really, really, even Hawaii was behind. That's why the Americans took over Hawaii. Way behind to the Japanese or to the English or the Americans where industrialization had already taken place. But his conclusion is that history is not considered to be a science, but something closer to the humanity. At best, history is classified among the social sciences, of which it rates as the least scientific, while the social scientists, like, you get the political science and Nobel Prize in economics, those are referred to as economic science, but history is not referred to as science. But if you've heard Dr. Amila Thapar speak, she teaches at Jain University in Delhi. She has exactly the same opinion. It's the same thing as the causative factors. And of course, just to digress, she is facing a lot of criticism because her views of Hinduism or the Vedas or the Upanishads are not the same as the BJP. But that's what his conclusion is, that history should be treated as a science, and you have to look at the causative factors, and you have to ignore but what the history that we study, like Hitler to them, it's a study, to him or Alexander the Great, it's a study of the idiosyncratic individuals. So, whereas the entire development of the whole human race, taking on from Darwin's Origin of the Species, to him, the sociological changes in behavior and development of behavior, which could be the result of geographic factors, is far more interesting. But I tell you, this man he's writing a book now on the collapse of societies. That should be interesting. Then the germs, obviously, he never mentions the Spanish flu in his book. I was quite surprised at that. That was something which took over the Western world, but he does mention the fact that most of the diseases that we have right now had come once after we domesticated the animals, because it comes from the cattle, it comes from the pig, it comes from the dog, it comes from other animals, and the animals we keep close to us, and it comes from that. But this, particularly right now, the virus that we have right now, when you read that book, you realize it's going to be a watershed moment for the human race, depending on how we deal with it and how we reacted. So thank you very much. I don't know who you selected the book. Thank you very much. I mean, it took us away from what we normally read, but I, for one, found it fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Thank you. I hope I kept within my time.
Yeah, yes, absolutely, Shireen. Thank you so much. I don't want to rush people, but if we limit ourselves, everyone gets a chance to speak. Okay? Nusrat, you may go ahead now.
Can you all hear me? Okay. Okay, I'd like to first present a short summary of the 4 parts of the book, then comment on its style and structure, and finally list a few of the lessons that we can learn from the book. In part 1, which is called Guns, Germs and Steel, he says it shaped the history of the world. That is his theme throughout the book. The first example of domination of one group of people over another is of the Maoris, who subjugated the Maori people with their guns, clubs and axes. These were the original tribes of the Chatham Islands near New Zealand. He then goes on to describe the colonization of the New World by Europeans in 1532. And again, he says that, of course, it was their guns, lances, daggers, and steel armor, and most importantly, horses. As these developed, one race of people became more superior to another and led them to conquer other people. Infectious diseases killed vast sections of a society. Isolated and poorly nourished people lack immunity from smallpox, measles, and deadly diseases. So when a large number of people die in a population, they fall behind in the race for advancement. In part 2, he talks about food production, and he says that the rise in agriculture led to population growth, and along with the domestication of animals, the societies evolved into political units and chiefdoms. There were those who grew crops advanced faster than others. And he's talking about the Fertile Crescent, and he's saying that the high-yielding crops like peas, barley, and cereal grew there very easily simply because of their Mediterranean climate. And then in part 2, he also talks about the axis of orientation, which Shireen has mentioned, saying that, well, the Americas have a north-south axis, and Eurasia has the east-west one, and the east-west axis has an advantage because of similar climate, seasonal variation, temperature, and crops and livestock can spread easily. And then part 3 is about, first he talks about the inventions, and he says that most inventions developed not because there was the demand for it, but because of experimentation and curiosity. And he's saying, he gives the example of Thomas Edison's phonograph, saying that when it was first meant to preserve the last words of people, record what they said. But later on, when they saw that they could play music on it, they exploited it in a commercial way. And then one needs to wonder that why were all inventors European, like James Watt, Thomas Edison, and the Wright brothers? And he answers this and says, their societies encouraged inventiveness. They were receptive to their invention. They created an atmosphere where invention was encouraged and rewarded. Then he talks about germs, and he gives us, of course, frightening figures all throughout the book. In the First World War, for example, 21 million dying of the influenza, Europe's quarter of their population being wiped out with the bubonic plague. And then, of course, everywhere in the book, again and again, he has said that the Aborigine people were decimated, killed in large numbers. And then he also talks about writing, and he's saying that writing was an important factor of an advancement of a society. There again, geography and ecology influenced the writing. So he talks about the Sumerian writing, saying that, well, the Sumerians of Mesopotamia, the Mexican Indians, Egyptians and Chinese, they were able to develop writing simply because of their geographical location. They were advanced in other a part of their achievement. And then he talks about the importance of government and religion. He's saying in part 3 that government and religion determine the structure and power of a society, from bands to tribes to states. All must unite under a centralized or decentralized power. And part 4 is about New Guinea, China, and Australia. And he says that, well, again, the Europeans with their guns, germs, and steel easily succeeded in annihilating the Aborigines. And these and other reasons also enabled them to colonize Europeans. Be colonized by the Europeans. So the Europeans not only had superior equipment, they also had the political institutions to organize it all. That's also very, very important. The chapters on Africa are interesting. They talk about five of the 6 major divisions of humanity coming from there. The fact that they speak 1,500 languages. So these are all very interesting information. Now the epilogue again, he makes an interesting observation. As Europe was fragmented politically, it could compete with each other and have their numerous inventions. China, on the other hand, is united under one ruler or form of government. So a single error in leadership led to the suffering of its consequences by a large number of people. And he gives the glaring example in the Cultural Revolution between 1960s and 70s. A few leaders decided to close the country's school system for 5 years. And the last chapter is on Japan. In the earlier, Japan had the advantage of an abundance of fruit in their environment and abundance of fish on their coastal waters. And their contribution to early civilization was the invention of pottery and the technique of double cropping for higher yield of crops. And then he also talks a lot about the Japan-Korea hostility. Now, in structure, I think that with so much of information, he really had to divide the book into 4 parts. Otherwise, it would have been even more difficult to read. He has included many tables and graphs, and apparently there are photographs too in the original book. But for copyright reasons, we didn't get such photographs and more diagrams. So obviously, the original book must have been very well laid out. So the book would have been a dry textbook with facts and figures only, but he has he has also commented on the social aspects of society, which makes it a very interesting read rather than just a dry textbook. For example, in Japan, as late as the 1940s, school children were taught that the European ancestor was a deity. But only when Emperor Hirohito openly declared that he was not of divine descent, only then could they be relieved of such misconceptions. Then he also talks about the samurai, which is quite understandable. He said that they initially refused to accept guns simply because their their skill of using the sword and the honor of being a samurai was so important. So a cultural factor got in the way of them accepting a technology. So we have to understand this as well. And also, I like the fact that he has interspersed his writing with personal anecdotes. That makes it very, very interesting. He talks about himself and his wife and going to places. And of course, in the film, you will see that he's a completely different person when he went to Guinea. I mean, he didn't want to come back from there. It was a paradise that he had found. So that makes the book not just a dry textbook. And then also, there are many literary references in the book. The Anna Karenina principle is very interesting, but somebody has said that no, that principle doesn't, I don't agree with that principle at all. I mean, how can you compare domestication of animals to a marriage? Because in Leo Tolstoy's book, the first sentence is happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way, meaning that the deficiency of any one of a number of factors dooms an endeavor to failure. So when you're domesticating animals, everything like the diet of the animal, the growth rate, the disposition, the features of organization have all got to come together for you to be able to domesticate it. For example, the zebra could not be domesticated because it's a very hostile animal. So now, there are a few lessons that we can learn from here. Number one, I would say, we have to create an environment whereby inventors and thinkers are encouraged to conduct research and find new technology and better products. Scientific research is especially important today as we are desperate to find the cure for the COVID-19 COVID-19 vaccine. The political fragmentation of Europe helped it to advance by means of competition. Similarly, we must compete and contribute to global warfare. Efficient political systems and governments are a necessity for mankind to advance. We like to criticize politics and politicians, but they are a necessity to maintain order and enable us to prosper. We are watching with keen interest the politics involved in the manufacture and distribution of the COVID-19 vaccine. This then the fourth sort of point that is very important in this book is that native and indigenous people were killed, decimated, and annihilated. These facts should weigh heavily on our conscience, and we have to make a worldwide effort to ensure the rights of the indigenous people worldwide. And of course, the book has been very well received, but there's one professor, Kathleen Lowry, who is an anthropologist, and she has said that the book may be popular because it gets the best of the book. She's saying that Jared Diamond seems to be saying that colonialism, slavery, capitalism, racism were nobody's fault. The book also insults non-Western cultures and societies, as if to say that the societies are backward and pathetic, and they could not help it because of their geographical location. That way, the author is supporting racism. In fact, I would say that the facts and the figures that he provides enable us to draw our own conclusions as to the atrocities committed by the advantaged Westerners. So that way, he could really not get off the hook because he himself has provided us with enough information to say that, well, this is what happened. This is how the Aborigines and the less advantaged and the native people were decimated. So whatever our interpretation, the fact that he has given us so much of information, the fact he has provided all this material for us it definitely enriches us all. And at the end of the day, I think the Pulitzer Prize was definitely very well deserved. So that's basically, I try to keep it within about 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Nusrat. Thank you. And Iftikhar, you have the floor now.
Shall I come on?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you, Niyazapa. I must say both Shirin and Nusrat have done an absolutely superb job. I mean, this is not a book that lends to joyful reading or, pastime perusal. This is serious stuff. And I think both of them have shown remarkable persistence in their efforts and have produced results, ideas that I would very, very be daunted to contend in any way. In any case, this is an immensely well-documented and transdisciplinary non-fiction by an eclectic professor. Nyazapa, you've said he was a professor of geography. He was also, to my knowledge, professor of other things as well. Now, there are two ways to look at the volume. One is as literature, and two as a social science thesis. Now, to judge its literary value, one would have to read it from cover to cover, which I have not. So I cannot comment on it. But since I'm fully aware and cognizance of the author's thesis, I have discussed this with some colleagues, including Nusrat, and I can address this as an academic, also as one who has remained involved with global affairs, as I have. Earlier major Western philosophers did not fight shy of racism. Take Friedrich Nietzsche, for instance. He clearly believed the appropriate genome mix could create the Ubermensch, or Superman, which was the embodiment of the highest human values on Earth. Or Immanuel Kant, who had said, the Chinese, Indians, Africans, and indigenous peoples of America are congenitally incapable of philosophy. Now, by contemporary standards, by standards of today, these observations are hugely politically incorrect. Now, as we all know, that hypothesis must be put to test by use of data and arguments. And then if you can pull off a QED, quod erat demonstratum, it becomes a thesis, like a geometry theorem exercise. Diamond starts off in a politically correct fashion. His hypothesis is that Western progress, both civilizational and also military, is owed not to the race or genomes, but mainly to geography and environment. He thought the Europeans were essentially lucky in two respects. One, they had unusually domesticable plants and animal species, and second, a latitudinal east-west rather than a longitudinal north-south orientation, so that a species in one part was at home in another. Now, these advantages, according to him, aided their successes in peace and war. So, history was the product of geographical and environmental determinism, contrasting Karl Marx's economic determinism. Once geography is fixed, all else is inevitable. Now, Diamond fills his study with enormous data. In fact, one is wont to lose the woods for the trees, and which is why I admired the presentations we heard from Shirin and Nusrat. They obviously were very much in control of the woods as well. But that would not be so with a normal reader. But one does get the impression that he doesn't quite pull off the QED, the quod erat demonstratum. For instance, despite the commonality of space, latitudinal linkages, food, and climate, the historic conflicts in the Northern Hemisphere could not be prevented, like the world wars, the American Civil War, or the bloody Franco-German rivalry. Also, if it is all about being first in setting up farming, the Chinese should be the world's preeminent civilization. He later admits that it is not just geography, but there are other causes. But by doing so, he diffuses his own thesis, thereby actually weakening it. I would therefore be circumspect about viewing all historic possession through his lens. There may be those who will argue that he may still be proven right, but not in the way that he would have liked. China's rise, for instance. Look at the coronavirus. Emanates from China. The West reacts abysmally, and the Western economy crumbles. China and the East succeeded handling it and forge ahead. So, Diamond's analysis may become so accurate that he may be himself unable to believe his own conclusions. In fact, there are more serious arguments pointing this way. The rise of the East, I mean. The famous British historian Neil Ferguson speaks of 6 powerful concepts that drove the Western progress, which the rest of the world lacked. These are competition, science, rule of law, modern medicine, consumerism, and Protestant work ethic. He called it, in today's digital terminology, the killer apps that allowed the West to go ahead of the rest. But now he warns that the days of Western predominance is numbered. The rest, particularly Asia and China, have downloaded the killer apps, and which the West once monopolized. And the West appears to have literally lost faith in itself. Now, from my perch in Singapore, I feel I'm at the confluence of the West and East. Both cultures are fused here. It is largely a function, of course, of globalization. Things are just called differently. Now, it reminds me of an Ogden Nash whimsy expressed in a witty doggerel, and it goes, I give you now Professor Twist, a conscientious scientist. Trustees exclaimed, he never bungles, and sent him off to distant jungles. Camped on a tropic riverside, one day he misses his lovely bride. She has, the guide informed him later, been eaten by an alligator. Professor Twist could not but smile. You mean, he said, a crocodile? So what difference does it make? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Iftikhar, for saying it so beautifully.
I'm sorry, I'll have to leave soon, as I said. So yes, I was not intending to make very substantive remarks, but no, I thought this really merited the kind of attention, and I'm so glad that you all have given it, and this book richly deserves it.
Let me just add something here, since you're speaking from Singapore. I know I'm speaking out of turn, but I take I take this opportunity. I think some of us watched the documentary, the National Geographic documentary, and it's not exactly the same as the book. And it ends, in fact, the ending of the third part is into the tropics. And that is very interesting because it talks about, Diamond leaves out India entirely. He talks about in the documentary shows the difficulties that the European settlers had in Africa because of malaria. And he also talks about how the documentary also shows how the native Africans were able to combat malaria initially because of their lifestyle. But when they were Europeanized, when they were colonized, they started living close together and they suffered acutely from malaria. And the documentary talks about, I'm sorry, I don't remember the percentage, but how a large number of children succumb to malaria. And the documentary ends with Singapore and Malaysia, which is why I brought it up while Iftikhar is still here, how Singapore and Malaysia, while being in the tropics, have been able to, combat malaria, and have been, these great success stories.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
you want to comment on that, Iftikhar?
Thank you, Niazapa. Yes, this is in some ways also disproves the Diamond thesis. Actually, since Diamond wrote, there has been a genre of literature on this subject. There is a book called, I think it's the Revenge of Geography by someone called Robert Kaplan. Robert Kaplan is somebody I know, by the way. I mean, I have done conferences with him. Now, these people, I mean, it was fashionable in that decade to attribute causation in sort of human development or civilizational development to geography. Now, as you know, causation is a very difficult subject. I mean, it means correlating what has happened to some cause, to a reason. I mean, the sun doesn't rise because the cock crows. That's a logical fallacy. So what you have just said shows the logical fallacy in that argument. It is human endeavor that has made Singapore and Malaysia, and probably, if you can stretch it a bit, Taiwan and Hong Kong and some islands different. Different because human endeavor has brought about these differences, which has today placed it on an equal footing with the rest. And this is the point I was making about the rise of China, which might prove the Diamond thesis on the flip side, saying that China has succeeded for those reasons. Like, for example, it's been said, like Rusat mentioned, that the centralization and the command of the emperor, we also discussed that, emperor, something like that. But centralization also might have its advantages. They say that, I mean, this is of course a bit sensitive subject, that India, despite all its failures, will still remain a democracy, because no state in India can become autocratic for too long, cannot become an autocracy. I mean, the Indian Stalin in the South cannot become the Stalin of Russia, you see, because he will eventually be pulled down. So basically, the old thesis, and I think we discussed it at one point in time when we discussed Bangabandhu's biography, that there are those who believe that human beings actually make a difference. This is where the Ubermensch comes, and we discuss Carlyle's heroes and hero worship. So you see, yes, this shows that despite its geographical locations, latitudinal location, this part of the world eventually caught up with the West. Yes, the West was preponderant, but the cause is not what Diamond says. So that is the conclusion.
Thank you, Iftikhar. Thank you so much, and thank you for being with us.
I'll stay along for a little while and hear.
It's always a pleasure to have you here. Sanjita, would you like to speak next? But before you speak, Sanjita, I would like to congratulate you on that lovely story that came out today in the Star Literature page. It's a lovely story. It's a fairy tale, but it is also about a woman's power.
Yes, madam.
Thank you so much, Sanjita, for that
Thank
story.
you, madam. Thank you, madam.
Okay.
So,
Sanjita?
yes, madam. It was an exemplary book. The writing was so brilliant. I was touched by it. And good books, they have a power to transform you. And after finishing the book, I felt to some extent I was transformed. And I would like to thank everyone of TRC for choosing this book and providing me the opportunity to read it. So yes, it's a thick book. It's a tome, and at the beginning, I felt reluctant for about a week. I didn't want to touch it. Then I saw the documentaries, and I read about diamond, and then I found it interesting, and then once I started reading the book, I was fascinated by each and every word that he penned. Madam started the session with the question that why do some nations they have the ability to conquer others, and some of them they don't. I think Mr. Chaudhary, he said he used the phrase human endeavor, which is very important to conquer other nations. The spirit that you have, your willpower works at the basis. So that is the core part. That's going to be the core part of my discussion. But at the same time, I would like to touch upon the background. At the heart of the book, there's this word called disparity, inequality. So why there are inequalities and disparities among the people of all the nations, and that brings us to the theme of the book. And Diamond, he brilliantly puts the theme in just one sentence when he says that uh, the differences among people, it's not because of, it's not biological differences, but it's something that is inherent in their environment. So it's not just your biology. Of course biology is important, but at the same time environment basically plays the key role over here. So that brings us to the background of the author, why he wrote the book. I found some biological factors working behind it. Like he said that his mother was a teacher, a linguist who focused on language, and his father was a physician, a doctor who was specialized in genetics. At the introductory part of the book, when he is trying to describe us the incident of Yali, his conversation with Yali, he provides us the background that his mother was more into writing and his father was more into science. And biologically, he inherited these characteristics that, he was following his father's footsteps. He went to the med school, though he didn't complete his degree. But he was more into writing. Writing was in his genes. He was carrying writing in his blood. So, and he was interested in history, in linguistics, and all of them, they are reflected in the book. So the topic of the book is history, but the approach is science. So he's bringing up a new branch. I have never heard of it, and he's calling it historical science. So my focus, it's going to be on part three, European germ exchange, and how he's linking food production uh, and with writing, and how food production and writing, they're connected to germs. So the main part, the core part of my discussion today, is going to be the germ, how apart from guns and steel, germs contributed um, in human conquest. So he's saying that writing is the most important invention during the last few thousand years, and writing basically, it led to the invention of technology, because writing is something that is accurate. This is detailed, and when you're writing, it's more easier for you to persuade people because you're documenting. It becomes easier for you, and it has the ability to cross the barriers of place and time. So when writing, it spread through trade, religion, and war. Um, Human conquest, it took a different uh, stance. I'll begin with my discussion with the invention of the Spanish invention in Mexico, the discussion on germs, that during the 15th century, uh, the Spaniards, they invaded Mexico, and with the fall of the Aztec Empire, it occurred. Uh, it's not because Mexicans, they were more skilled in weaponry or warfare. They were fighting equally, but what happened? Um, uh, they brought on a slave who had smallpox, a Cuban slave from Spanish Cuba, and Mexico's population, it went from 20 million to 1.6 million in just like 50 years. And in 1618, the Aztecs were completely um, dissolved. So the survivors, people who were fighting the war, they were demoralized by this mysterious illness, and that actually helped the Spaniards to win the war. So and part three, it starts with a description of farmers, and Diamond Hill links farmers with writing and with germs. And I would love to read that part of the book, which is on page 222. He brilliantly writes, why did the rise of agriculture launch the evolution of our crowd infectious diseases? One reason just mentioned is that agriculture sustains much higher human population densities than does the hunting gathering lifestyles, on the average 10 to 100 times higher. In addition, hunter gatherers frequently shift camp and leave behind their own piles of feces with accumulated microbes and worm larvae. But farmers are sedentary and live amid their own sewage, thus providing microbes with a short path from one person's body into another's drinking water. And and he says that farmers, they tend to breathe nasty germs, and these germs, these microbes, they are enough to wage wars of conquest. And he begins this section with a description of an experience of a young doctor who was his friend. And it was a story where a couple was distressed by a mysterious illness, and the husband had pneumonia, and he couldn't speak English, but the wife could, and the wife translated what happened to the husband. And finally, it was revealed that
And yeah, have we lost
She,
her?
we've lost her. We've
Yes,
lost her.
We can't hear anything.
Yeah.
so Wi-Fi must have gone. So maybe we wait for her to come back, and if anyone has a comment, let's wait for Sangeeta to come back. But we are well in, our time is all right. We've managed our time very well. So if any, okay,
She's
Sangeeta is back.
She's
She's joined.
Yes. Oh, she's gone again. Oh, Sangeeta, are you back?
It's actually Khadija, but it's all right.
No, I think I can see
her
Sangeeta.
her
Yeah.
Sangeeta's mic is off.
Sangeeta, are you back? Yes.
yes, I'm back.
Yes.
I have
Yes.
resumed my
Yes.
discussion.
Yes. Can you continue? You were talking about
Thank you.
the wife translating her husband's what her husband had done.
Yes, yes. And it was revealed that the husband caught this microbe of pneumonia. He got the germs from the sheep at a nearby farm. He was having regular sexual intercourse with this sheep, and and that brings us to the topic of how animals, in a very bizarre kind of a way, I know, but how animals, they are, the breeding grounds of the diseases, the epidemic diseases, the germs. So through this bizarre incident, the writer basically introduces us to the topic of the disease, human diseases, which has a relation, which has animal origins. So like, you cannot deny the fact that the diseases we have today, they all have erupted from domestic animals, our pets, our farm animals, and infectious diseases like smallpox, flu, plague, measles, cholera, they evolved from animals. For example, measles, um, it came from the cow. The cows, they used to have rinderpest, a disease which is similar to measles. And when people were staying in farms with these infected cows, cows who were infected with rinderpest, the it it seemed like they had a similar uh, disease, animal pathogen, which evolved from rinderpest, and it transformed into measles in human beings. And what Diamond then goes to the next part of the discussion, where he's saying that why epidemic diseases, the illnesses, they are the biggest killers in human history, and they are basically the shapers of history, not guns, not steels. So. So war-borne microbes, they killed more people in the war than the battle wound. And enemies who were defeated were killed by nasty germs. As I mentioned the story, the war between the Spaniards and the Aztec, how Aztecs were completely wiped out. Um, by the germs of smallpox. So AIDS, it evolved from wild African monkeys. Bubonic plague evolved from rats. Rabies came from dogs. So, out of our own selfish interest, in order to stay alive, to stay healthy, we are killing germs, and at the same time, we are also creating the breeding ground for germs. So when an epidemic, it occurs in an area, the microbe, it enters the land population, people get infected, some of them die, some recover, and some become immune. Um, and then what happens after a long period of time, no one is left alive who could still be infected. People become immune. And then it seems like the disease has died out until an infectious person, he arrives from outside to restart the cycle again. And it gave me some ideas about the corona disease that we're having now, the COVID-19. Um, that some people are genetically more resistant than others to certain germs. It happens. It is related to the natural selection process. So Spaniards were not killed by Spanish by the smallpox, but the Mexicans did, and because they were genetically more resistant against smallpox. So when an epidemic disease and their waves, they are caused, they follow certain steps one after the other, and we have to remember that epidemic diseases were more terrifying before the invention of modern medicines. Um, and nowadays, we are more equipped, we are more learned, we know the origin of the disease, we know how to tackle with it, but we are still struggling against this pandemic. So, epidemic diseases, it spreads rapidly. This is an acute illness. You either die or you recover, and then you develop antibodies, and it's restricted to humans. And it occurs in densely packed places amongst numerous large, dense human population. That is why Diamond calls them crowd diseases. So, what happens because of the rise of agriculture, because of the farmers and their sedentary life, crowd diseases, they occurred and they spread everywhere. But it never happened to the hunter-gatherer groups, the small groups who were always on the move. And the farmers, they were spreading the disease through rodents. Rodents were transmitting those diseases because they used to live among the stored food. Then they were clearing the forests, and for that, mosquitoes, they spread everywhere. Farmers, they live amidst their own sewage, and microbes spread from their body to their drinking water. And sometimes they even use their own feces and the animal feces for their fertilizers. So, and when the rise of the cities, they occur during the rise of the cities, it what happened? The wars form like sanitation condition erupted, and a constant immigration of healthy peasants from the countryside. What happened? Peasants were healthy, quite healthy, but when they encountered the unhygienic environment of the city, uh, they they died, and there was constant death of city dwellers out of crowd diseases as well. And there was also the world trade route, and for what the diseases were transmitted across the globe. And due to world travel and plane journeys, we are getting diseases that we have never encountered before. So the densely populated farms and animals together, they are more prone to germs, and they kill more people than weaponry, than steel and germs. So Diamond ends the chapter here by on this note, and I'm going to connect germs with writing by saying that if you think about writing, the history of writing, the history, human history is basically a progression from savagery to civilization, and we consider people who can write, they are the only people who are civilized. Because civilized are the ones who can write. So knowledge brings power. You can spread knowledge through writing, and therefore writing brings power to modern societies. And it's indispensable in modern societies. It transmits information, it keeps records. So, in today's world, apart from microbes, weapons, and writing, they are the modern agents of conquest. And writing has an overwhelming value, yet not all the nations that know writing are strong. For example, Diamond brings in the example of Iraq, who had writing about like 4,000 years ago. They invented writing 4,000 years ago. But most of the people in Iraq are illiterate now. But think about Japan and Scandinavia, is the Scandinavian countries. They are 100% literate, and they didn't have writing at the time when Iraq had it. So, but at the same time, Diamond is saying that early writings they were confined to professional writers, the scribes, who worked under kings and priests, and they were very ambiguous, complex, and very difficult to decipher. And writing was invented in farming communities because when you're writing, when you're inventing something, you must have a storage of food. You shouldn't be thinking about food when you're inventing something, when you're trying to invent something. So it occurred in farming communities. It never developed in hunter gatherer societies. So if you can write, and at the same time if you can develop immunity to a wide range of pathogens, you gain the ability to win wars. And in this way, writing, food production, and diseases are interconnected. And food production is a prerequisite, it's a necessary condition to nurture and develop a skill like writing. And and therefore, after its invention, writing was used. Uh, like he says that Diamond is saying that writing is at the heart of all invention of technology, of business, of modern science. And what I feel, I'll get back to the question that Madam asked, that why some nations they could conquer uh, some other nations and some could not. I think of course it was human endeavor, but at the same time we have to remember that writing was not invented by everyone. People who were industrious, like most of the languages in the world, they erupted from a few sources because writing was borrowed from neighbors, or societies were forced or inspired to develop writing skills. This is what Diamond said. And what I have understood is writing was invented in a very few societies. People who could really, uh, people had this, that having that indomitable spirits in them, inside of them, who wanted to conquer the world. People with that spirit, with that willpower, they invented writing, and others borrowed the writing skills from them. And that is why we see that most of the languages in the world today, they have a common one origin. Uh, and another thing is people were uh, like there were shackles in their feet. For example, the navy could not flourish in China because one person, the scientists, the sailors, when they tried to, the Chinese emperor didn't want it. He didn't want to explore the outer world. But the European societies, they could not stop scientists like Galileo or Newton when they tried to invent things new. They did it, and they crossed all the societal barriers, political barriers, And they did everything to invent things new and to store and spread their knowledge. I think that is the reason, the main reason, the willpower, the human endeavor, why some nations they can conquer other nations and some who cannot. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Sanjida. Actually, my question was not why they can conquer. My question is why did they want to do so? And Shireen did give an example, a reason why the British were so interested in going out and exploring the world, because it was only the first son inherited. Anyway, I'm not going to interject now. And maybe I should say this, that initially writing was not to write poetry.
Yes,
Writing was to keep accounts. Writing was to keep accounts. Writing was to keep a list of kings. So writing was a way to control the population. Writing was, I mean, হিসাব রাখার জন্যে
yes, record keeping.
was important. So that is something we must remember. Poetry came afterwards. And what was initial poetry? Poetry was the praise of kings, right? Okay, I don't want to interrupt the sequence, but I do hope that others will talk. Shahrukh, thank you so much, Sanjida, for that and for going into detail and for bringing in that, really, you know, what is called buggery, intercourse with animals. I didn't think that you would do it, but it was, I mean, it's so unthinkable, but it was quite common during Puritan England and Puritan America for someone to be brought up on charges of having sexual relations with his sheep. But of course, it doesn't mean that all animal diseases are
Have to animals.
transmitted to man because of sexual intercourse. It happens because of the close proximity in which farmers and live with their animals. Even in our country, you will go to these villages. Now, of course, you have these people have become, they have these farms for chickens. But, people who are small farmers, they keep chickens. And the chickens and the goats, they live in the same room as the farmer. So it's, very possible for diseases to be transmitted. I should not, I didn't want to interrupt. I did want to point those things out. And if you have questions, please note them down and we can take them up after Razia finishes. Now, Shahrukh, and unmute yourself. You have 15 minutes, Shahrukh.
It's a lot. Unmute. Okay. I will begin by saying that I went through this book not for any new knowledge, but my own uh, curiosity, this great curiosity on me to know what my ancestors were and what was my origin. And it's still there in me. We all want to know that did we as humans, did we develop from monkeys, as Darwin says, or by the natural process of evolution? Because we, as Homo sapiens, we became from animal form, the way we were walking on 4 feet next to the ground, and now slowly we rose and became Homo erectus. So I think this would interest us all. And of course, we later come to know that how human beings evolved from that animal stage where we had a bigger brain. So we had more brain material to learn inventions, invent tools to make life easy. From the hunter gatherer stage, it became much easier if we took the meat and cooked it, which we did at that time also. Then slowly we developed into societies, and some people remained hunter gatherers, others became farmers. Now, farming was actually a revolution at that time, because farmers learned how to uh, gather, to grow their own food, to also to start farming little bit, to keep domesticate animals, the animals that helped farmers, like the dog and the pig, which gave them food to eat, and the dog, which protected their stuff, their farms. And slowly, life became sedentary, and the farmers learned to stay in their own place and to concentrate on other things like inventions. Which tool will help them to improve their stuff? Cutting tools, stone tools, which began from the beginning until it became copper tools. And slowly, when man began to make more powerful fire to burn steel tools. So, like this, actually, it was for me, it was always curiosity to know about our own future that led me to continue this book from beginning to end. It's a fascinating book, and I recommend that it should be used as textbooks in many ways, because yes, there are many books talking about the Cro-Magnons and the Neanderthals and these prehistoric men, but very few which grabs your interest and goes on. I didn't actually have anything more to say because you have all said it. How medicines evolved, and how fighting evolved eventually. That people who were sedentary learned how to uh, fight, learned many inventions, but they didn't learn how to protect themselves. So races and groups of people who began as hunter farmers, hunter gatherers, then later on they became farmers, and then later on they themselves were defeated by others who came up, but still more belligerent. They had not led the sedentary life of farmers. So I think I will end there. That's because everything has been said. If you want.
Thank you, Shahrukh. Razia, okay. Does anyone have a question, or shall Razia go ahead? Okay, Razia.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. There isn't much that I can add. I will just try to wrap up a few things because, all the speakers have done such a brilliant job today. I'm amazed. They've really gone through it thoroughly. Now, Shireen and Nusrat gave us the divisions of the book, the parts of the book, and, the reasons why some societies have been successful and others not so. And I think Sanjida did a brilliant job too, because she did look at the third part and the part of germs, which is always like, ammunition and military sort of guns you can understand. But when the germs come in, so the germs, now it's not just germs, actually, there are two sides to it. One is the fact that these societies, because of the farming societies, because of their close contact, they were actually more immunized. All right, they got that level of immunity. Some got sick, some died, and those who survived became immune, and they passed these immune genes on to their offsprings. But what about societies that were not farming communities? If they were small, they just died out, finished. If they were not small, they changed, some died out, some got immune, and they continued that way. Now, that's one side to it. But the other side is, we being human beings, we have that what should I say? That side of us, the reason that we want that power, the conquering power, that we use this. We saw that this is such a good way of conquering another nation. So just to touch on what Sangeeta mentioned, that when the Americans, when they invaded America, there were these huge communities that were so they were so vulnerable to smallpox. They had not had any contact. And when the invaders realized that, when the Spanish realized that, they were actually offering them gifts. And those were the blankets. They would rub them against anyone who had smallpox and fold it and give it to these communities. And these communities, they, somehow, I don't know why, whether they were not weaving their own blankets or what, but they prized these foreign blankets. They prized these colored beads and all that. So they were very happy with these blankets, and they would all use it. And of course, whole communities, as Sangeeta mentioned, whole communities from 20 million to, I think, I don't know how many were left.
1 million.
1 million.
1.6 million.
So 95% of the whole community just died. And that's what they wanted. They wanted the land, not the people. So the land was left. So the germ thing, one side, it's like a double-edged sword. It can protect you, but you can also be vicious and use it. And I have to say this, now what's happening, this vaccine war that's going on, the people who have that, who are hoarding it, are not, when you think of human rights and helping and all the money that's given to poor countries, we don't want money, give us the vaccines. But no, there's this huge war being waged. So the same propensity, the same thought of how to have power, it's just power. That's all there is to it. How to have power over others is again being used after so many years. So anyway, Iftikhar, of course, gave us a brilliant, another side of it, so another take, and I think most of it has been dealt with. What I did notice about the book, I had to skim some parts, I was running out of time, that Diamond repeats a lot of things. He repeats over and over again. But the thing is, the repetition doesn't really make you bored, because, it's sort of just, because these are difficult concepts. I think he realized that, so this repetition just sets it down, sort of, yeah, okay, that's what he said. So these 4 reasons, domestication of animals, farming communities, the advantages, I think it just stresses. So even though it seems to be repetition, I think most of us welcomed it because it just made the points clearer to us. Just a little bit I want to add about the afterwards, right? When the 20th anniversary edition came on, he added that afterwards. That's about, I think, about 100 pages extra, and he starts with this story, personal anecdote, that he had the chance to visit Netherlands and then Zambia right after that. And he gives this analogy that if it was an ET, an extraterrestrial, and he would see Netherlands and he would say, this is definitely a poor country. And then if he saw Zambia, he would say, this country must be rich. But actually, it's just the other way around. And the reason would be, Netherlands, low, they don't have their own power. They don't have, they're not rich in mineral resources. They're flooded. Whereas Zambia has so many other advantages. But that's not the case. The case is just the opposite. So we come to, I don't know, I think something that we didn't mention is the fact that it's not just the geography. Because if you see the geography, you have North Korea, South Korea. You have Malaysia, Singapore. At one stage, they were economically, whatever, they were the same. But then at some stage, 50, 60, 70 years ago, one portion developed and the other didn't. Malaysia and Singapore. Singapore has gone way off. I heard my son was telling me that Malaysia, that first year, when COVID started, they just said, they stopped all schools. Singapore, of course, didn't. They continued, and at this point, they're actually thinking of giving a tablet to each and every student so that they do not have a problem. Of course, most of them do have tablets, but the government wants to give it to make it equal. So that if there's anyone, any family which is a bit disadvantaged, they won't feel that when it comes to education. But Malaysia has not been able to keep up to that. Whereas Singapore gets a lot of stuff from Malaysia. Even the water they drink comes from there. So, but they have that. There is the government, is the code of law. That is so strong that they have been able to be successful. Just like South Korea, they have moved ahead, whereas North Korea has not, even though they had that sort of, the playing field was very level at that time. That's actually that's about it. I don't know if I can add anymore because, like I said, most of the people who have gone above me have done such a thorough job. So, Niazapa, I think we can open it up to the other people who did not participate, but perhaps have questions now or comments they want to make. They can come in.
Thank you so much, Razia, for wrapping it up so well. And yes, we are open to questions. Anyone wants to comment or add something?
If there are no questions, can I say one thing?
Yes.
Just to follow up on what Razia has said.
Yes.
Okay. You see, now if you want to discuss as to why seriously it was the West that progressed, there is a very serious analysis that one of the driving factors for West's success, which is shared by part of the East, and that's what Razia was, I mean, the difference between Singapore and Malaysia, is that curiosity. Now, which came from, there are two things. One is the Socratic curiosity, the question why. This is very Western. I mean, you accept nothing at its face value. You ask why. Now, how did Socrates come to the truth? By just asking that simple question with three letters, why? Why? And then you came up with replies. And the second one was I mentioned that the Protestant work ethic, like prayer is work and not necessarily going to church or going to the place of worship, work. So this is one thing that the West shared with the Confucian world. The Western Protestant work ethic, like both Shahrukh Appa and we lived in Geneva. In Geneva, it's very Calvinistic, very Protestant, very work ethic oriented. When the bell rings in the morning, it's not for you to go to church, it's for you to go to work. So that's how they interpret it. Now, in the East, in the Confucian work ethics is a bit similar to that. So the point is, as I had said in my intervention, that you call it by different words, but if it's the same thing, the Protestant work ethic and the Confucian work ethic, it leads to the same result. The result is progress. The result is more civilizing influences. Thank you.
Sorry, just to add, thank you so much, Iftikhar. Appreciate that point. Just to, another little anecdote. When I was doing my master's in New York, we had Malaysian students and Singaporean students, and we had Malaysian Chinese student. The Malaysian Chinese and the Singapore, they played, but they worked really hard. They worked hard and they were at the top. Unfortunately, and I hate to say this, the Muslim Malaysian students who were there, they were just not in the same caliber. And the Chinese students were very upset about that they had got scholarships to come there because of the government, but they were not of the same caliber. Now, they get the advantage because they're Muslims belonging to that community, but somehow, that work ethic was not really there. I hate to say this, but that's so true. Thank you for pointing that out, Iftikhar.
Okay.
What speaker on?
Sorry?
I had one question.
Yes, go ahead.
I want to know why Jared Diamond, he totally ignores Southeast Asia, the Indus River, inhabitants, because writing was also discovered here. It started in the Indus Valley. Sanskrit was one of the languages, and it influenced all the languages in the Southeast Asian uh, s- uh, continent. Southeast Asia usually uses the same Devanagari um, alphabets like Sanskrit, but I don't know why he totally ignores, because everything evolved also in this part of the world, but we only hear about the Fertile Crescent, not about the Indus Valley.
You're so right, Shahrukh. Um, it's not a perfect book. It's not the book to end all books. I mean, there are lots of unanswered questions. And, excuse me. He talks about the Fertile Crescent, and we know that there was trade in those days between the Fertile Crescent and Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, because a seal, which these tablets, which there's a story, that the Epic of Gilgamesh, and there are these seals with pictures of Gilgamesh fighting lions. And a similar seal has been found in Mohenjo-daro. So we do know that there was a link. But not only does Diamond ignore Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, he also, and I would like to talk about this since people have not taken the advantage of the time. I would also like to talk about what he leaves out, and which Shireen mentioned briefly about the British inroads into India. One of the things that, these are two separate things, I'm going to separate them. The first thing I want to talk about is, and I would like to read his, not for the TRC, but for myself, the collapse of empires. He talks about the Fertile Crescent. It had everything. It had developed, agriculture.
No,
It had
sit, sit.
good crops.
No, that's right. I'm in a conflict. No, sit, sit. Okay. No, we are going to give you your drink, white, very nice Chardonnay.
It had, developed, grain which could be stored. It had developed writing. It had domesticated goats and sheep. It was a powerful, there were powerful countries there in the Fertile Crescent. Why did that civilization die out? Why did the civilization of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa die out? One of the things that Diamond says is that the Fertile Crescent was initially, it wasn't a lush green valley. It was dry, and the land was overexploited. And I think that is very important. And that is the same thing that must have happened in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. Another point that he made, I'm not really digressing, but I do want to draw your attention to this. He does talk about, China. He talks about China today at the end, and we can talk about that a little bit. But he also talks about, how the Islamic world, when Europe was in what is known as the Dark Ages, Arabia was flourishing. Arabia had astronomers, Arabia had geographers. In fact, I think the first map was drawn by a Muslim. They were translating, the Greek writing. They borrowed, of course, there is this controversy. Did India invent the zero, or did Arabia invent the zero? The cipher, the zero, which is so important. It does not exist with the, the Roman numerals don't have zero. So you have X, 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 X. X, X, no, you don't have so many X's. X, 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 X meaning 40, X, 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 V meaning 45, which is quite difficult. So the Middle East, up to 1500, was civilized. Why did that civilization die out? Why did that knowledge, why did that science, why did that art disappear? He asked the same question about China. Gunpowder, which we have been talking about again and again and again. And if you see the documentary, and I would recommend you to see the documentary, you see not only, the beautiful swords and rapiers of Toledo. Every gentleman had to wear a sword. Like every American has the right to own a gun, every Spanish gentleman had the right to own a sword, a fine sword. The documentary also shows us pictures of the elementary guns. They were not very sophisticated, but they did the work. Where did gunpowder come from? China. Where did paper come from? It came from China through the Arabs and reached the Western world. Where did printing come from? It came from China. So, I think, Jared Diamond's book has many flaws, but he does make us think what happened. Why did the Middle East stop developing? Why has Islam become so conservative? Why did China fail? Yes, there's no mention here about the opium wars, by the way. It's absolutely missing, which Amitabh Ghosh talks about. He does. But, so there are a lot of things here. But then at the end, he goes to China, and we can talk about China today. So here you have, the Fertile Crescent, that civilization collapsing, the Islamic civilization, if no one takes it amiss, collapsing, the Chinese civilization collapsing. But is the West going to rule forever? And Razia talked about COVID. Someone else talked about COVID. Sanjita talked about COVID. Let us talk about COVID. Where did the COVID germs come from? There has been a lot of this controversy. Let us bring it out today. Has it come from, the Chinese market, where exotic animals are sold to be cooked and eaten? Was that virus manufactured in a laboratory? The germs that decimated North America and South America of its native population, that decimated South Africa of its native population. Have the Chinese read Jared Diamond's book? And are they using the germs for this new warfare? Because more than steel, more than horses, more than guns, it was the power of germs which decimated populations. Then I will make this leap. I'm sorry, I'm going to take the floor. I don't usually talk, today I will talk. Diamond does not talk about India. I do not know why. He talks, even in the documentary, and I mentioned the documentary, and I will end with that. In the documentary, which is a wonderful documentary, and you should see it, the documentary talks about the European settlement of Africa and how the Europeans started to go north. When they were in South Africa, they were all right. But when they proceeded north, they started falling ill. And they found that the Africans were all right, which is, of course, not true today because we see, these terrible sights of poverty, of hunger, of starvation, of human beings and of animals. But one of the points that Diamond makes is that the Europeans, some of them met with fierce tribes who were, well equipped, well armed, and were able to withstand them. But the Europeans succumbed to malaria. In India, the same thing happened. In India, the graveyards, the European graveyards are full of, you see the tombstone and you see the young people who died in India. It wasn't just malaria. Sanjida mentioned cholera. Malaria and cholera were the two big killers in India. Despite this, Britain succeeded. Despite, the germs, the indigenous germs, which the Europeans had no resistance to. Despite this, the British colonized India. They came in 1600, you can, with the East India Company, very much. And of course, like the Aztecs, like the Incas, we welcomed them. We were so well off, so comfortable. We gave them the Diwani of Bengal. And slowly these merchants told us what their real intention was. And 1757, the Battle of Plassey, 1857, what is called, used to be called the Sepoy Mutiny, now it is called the First War of Independence, and the British took over, the British Crown took over India, and British ruled here till 1947. And when did they leave? They left when they didn't have the money to support themselves. And they left India, Indian subcontinent, in turmoil, divided it up into two countries, into three parts and two countries. And the two countries were divided again in 71. What did the British do? Now, I'm sorry that Diamond does not bring in, but of course you can't bring in everything. But these are questions that did come to my mind when I was reading the book. And I thought to myself, how can he ignore India, the jewel in the crown? But of course, Jared Diamond is not an Englishman. Jared Diamond is an American. For him, India does not matter. So I will shut up. I usually don't talk, as you all know, and we have 15 minutes. Please, those of you who have kept silent, please talk, please say something. And then we will, we will talk about the date of the next meeting and for the next. Yes.
Okay, I think Khadija. Yeah. Okay. Khadija, then myself, then Shireen.
Okay. Actually, I don't have any questions.
Then I finally.
Mute yourself until it is time to talk. And there is, what is called a hand. So if you want to talk, you can put up your hand and I'll see. So Khadija, please go ahead.
Okay. Actually, I saw the documentary. It was very interesting. I did not get the time to read because I'm reading a similar book called The Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. It's by Yuval Noah Harari. And it is very similar. It talks about the evolution of mankind. And the documentary was very interesting. And today's speakers were excellent. Thank you,
The
everyone.
documents.
Yes, yeah, the documentary on National Geographic. I saw that, and but I just wanted to share something very different. If you can give me the permission, today I was coming down Bohanani Road 10, and there I saw this, the Reading Cafe, TRC. So I checked it up on the Facebook, and it's a cafe downstairs, and upstairs is the book shop. And I checked; it's got a beautiful collection of books. And once the pandemic is over, that can be our next place for meeting, TRC meetings. Just on a lighter note, I just wanted to share with everyone.
Wonderful. Did you meet the owner? I mean, did you ask?
I think I know them.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful.
Right.
So we can look forward to the end of COVID and TRC meeting at TRC. Okay.
Right. That's right.
Will I say or Shireen? You want to go first, Appa? Will I say or Shireen?
Yeah.
Shireen.
Okay. Just very briefly, you mentioned, Dr. Saman, that we gave the British the Diwani of Bengal. That's not actually factually correct. What happened when they came to India, when they came to Delhi, what they got was trading rights.
Yeah.
By the time they came to Bengal, they altered the documents to give themselves revenue rights. Yes, we were so stupid and we were not interconnected that well that we didn't follow up, but they took over through
right
document here. That's it.
Thank you, Shireen, for correcting me. But you're quite right. You see, that is the point I wanted to make about writing. The British knew the Indian mentality. They knew the Indian culture. Because of writing, they had sent spies. And these spies took, and this is, they did you do two things with writing. You record and you propagate, you advertise. So, people knew how rich India was. They knew how rich Bengal was. Why did they come to Bengal? They knew how rich it was. Yes, you're so right. They were given trading rights, but what they did was they sort of like doctored the document and became, rulers of Bengal. Really.
Revenue collectors.
Nusrat, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, Appa, I would just like to mention that, he has repeated himself very often, but in one of the chapters, he gave us a list of very impressive names when he says that individuals are capable of bringing about a change for better or for worse in any society. And the list of names is very impressive. Buddha, Jesus Christ, Hazrat Muhammad, Hitler, Alexander the Great, and Lenin. But after that, not a word of how these were influenced. So instead of repeating himself so often on other topics, he could have at least said that these are the for better or for worse, whatever his opinion is, he could have been diplomatic about it. But then giving us a list of these names and saying that this is big changes also came about because of them, but not furthering his argument, I think it was a little frustrating for many readers. It definitely was for me, because I wanted him to say something. That is he going to say good things or bad things about Lenin, Muhammad, Jesus Christ? What is his opinion? And then I have my own opinion, but what did he want to say? So bringing up something and then not furthering the argument, it was a little frustrating for me. So that's just my remark on it.
Yes, Iftikhar. Thank you, Nusrat.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, Shireen and Nusrat make tremendous points, but this thing is a little different. It relates to what you were inquiring earlier. I mean, it is generally believed that three things happened in the Western civilization which gave the West the impetus to do everything that the West achieved. One was the Renaissance. The Renaissance was they looked back on their past and glorified it through art, literature, etc., all that. So it gave a huge boost to Western civilization. Second was the Reformation. Reformation was the religious Reformation, the Protestant ethic, saying that, okay, we don't have to depend so much on going to the afterworld. We might as well work in this world and achieve something, which is very important. I mean, so which is the important reason for Western success, the Reformation. The third was the French Revolution, which gave the political institutions that, to the Western world. So the Renaissance, the Reformation, the French Revolution comprised the Western civilization that gave that impetus to come east and conquer, etc. Today, now this is 25 years since Diamond wrote that book, right? But lots of things, the 25 years have changed the world in a way that the last 200 years didn't. In the 25 years, what the Chinese have done is they have downloaded these elements that led to Western successes. And they're encapsulating these in a way that they are actually almost replaying what the West played out in the last 200 years. So today we are poised at a point where we are probably about to see a predominance of the Eastern, the rise of the East, the Chinese culture overtaking that of the West. It hasn't happened yet, but it's a phenomena that's in progress. That's the point I wanted to make.
Thank you so much, Iftikhar. And the conflict between China and India will be won by China because it is unified.
Yes.
Whereas the
Yes.
Indian
This is the big debate here, China and
Yes,
India.
we can-
But
okay.
since I'm a diplomat, you don't want me to give my opinion on
You're
this.
not yet a diplomat. You're not.
Oh, no.
You're still a diplomat.
Oh,
Gentleman at large. No?
Yes, that's true. I have this freedom here. That is right. My freedom is sadly constrained by some guests, which I already have in my house at this point in time. We're also listening in.
Okay.
So,
Listen, did you want to
anyway,
add something
that's
again?
all
One
right.
of your colleagues from National University has written a very interesting book, I think, on India versus China. Somebody called Zuma.
Yes, that's right. That's right. He has. He's a scion of a very important Indian diplomatic family, India versus China. You see, the point about, can I be frank?
Yeah.
The point about some of these Indian analysts are, they say everything, the first 3/4 of the book, which is correct, I mean, which is really logical, etc. The last 1/4 would be something to satisfy the Indian reading public. You see, the Indian authority reading public. So unfortunately, my friend makes that same. I don't think, he doesn't think it's an error, but I think that is there is a logical fallacy involved. But it's a very good book. And I think it, in many ways, I would recommend it because in many ways it describes why China is going ahead and India is following.
Amina,
Okay, I'll take leave of you if I might.
Amina wants to say something. Amina?
Okay, Amina.
Amina? Amina? Yes. Go ahead.
Yes, hello. Everything has been great, and it was a great book to see. But as you have, Anyas answered part of my question by talking about why Jared didn't speak about India, because that is a great civilization, and it was the British, ruled us for 200 years. If you look very carefully, I read the beginning of the book and then I saw the documentary. But if you go to the documentary and read very carefully, there's a part where Africa refutes this book and Jared's theory, especially about that axis. The Africa continent, I think, as you all know, in the map is not shown as big as it is. It's a huge continent. Somehow, some era, something is never shown. So over there, the axis, the horizontal, the latitude, and again, the north and south, they say not much of a difference. They've given the diagram. If you see to that, they have refuted Jared's theory of, that longitudinally that it's going. For North America, the two Americas, it's okay, but not for Africa. It's not presented properly in the atlas. I don't know why. And as I feel like this book is a bit incomplete, and it can be called, guns, germs, and steel for the whole world. He's left out so many parts, India and other parts. That's what I feel. And why did the Europeans and all went? They were very adventurous by nature. Why did we keep sitting in our place in India after having so much? We didn't have the urge to go and discover or anything, and we were just sitting, and these people came with their guns and everything and took us over. We didn't have a proper army or any sort of I may be wrong, someone can correct, or any ammunition or anything to defend ourselves. We didn't have a proper army or anything, whereas we were so rich. Why didn't we develop our defenses? Can anyone answer that? I mean, these people came by sea, and they just, through Calcutta, they entered over there, and they took us over, and of course people between, besides the point. But why were Indians, why were we all sleeping while we did have a great civilization and this thing, and they just come and take us over? That's what I feel.
The 17 horsemen.
Okay, I think we stop there now. It is time.
Yes, Shahrukh, what did you say?
We begin on time and we end on time. Shahrukh?
There are 17 horsemen.
Yeah, so, and we were a rich nation, so much wealth and everything. So were we just sitting with that and just dressing and and doing all this? We had agriculture, we had the farming and everything. But I think it's also our fault. Those people were adventurous. They were greedy. They were robbers. They came and they took.
I think
they had a motive.
Yes.
No, but it was at the end of the Mughal, end of the Mughal dynasty. The rulers, I think, had become weak, and they had become too busy. The rulers, the central rulers, the Mughals. By then, it was a decline of the Mughal dynasty.
Yes.
So that is what happened. That is what happened. That's how they came in.
The Mughals were also outside.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, Khadija, yes,
also,
I remember.
Okay, so let us not get...
the Mughal had become weak.
So they came in and they... Right. And they were also... they became the tax collectors.
Yes.
The British became the tax collectors for Bahadur Shah Zafar.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's how they started getting the income. And I recently
read, thank you everyone. I do want to end the meeting.
Yeah, but why didn't we or the Chinese think of going out and conquering? We were not that adventurous.
We have to try to answer. You know, there was that thing that the Hindus were not supposed to cross the ocean.
No. Yeah, Kalapani.
You remember that?
Kalapani, right.
Okay, so there were these taboos. Right? So let us stop here. I think we have had a wonderful discussion.
I think we have
it's been very good, and I'm very happy for having you all suggesting this book, and it's been very informative.
Wonderful.
Very nice. Our next meeting, and let me just remind you, our next meeting is on
31st.
On July 31st. And the book we have chosen is A.G. Stock's Memoirs of Dhaka University. I will be getting copies for members who live in Bonani and Gulshan. I hope to get them. And you can collect them, maybe after the stricter lockdown ends. All right.
Thanks,
and I think it will be 350 taka a copy. Those of you who live in Dhanmandi should try to collect a copy from, the Library of Bangladesh at ULAB. If you call me, I will give you the name of the person and his number, so you can contact him and collect it.
What about your other book, Baromashi? Where do we get that?
Amina, this is a TRC meeting. We are not talking about my books, please. Okay.
Okay.
So
Okay.
thank you all. Thank you very much for participating and for your. And I replied to you, Amina. I replied to your email. I replied
Okay, I'll see
to
it.
your email. Okay, that's a personal matter between you and me.
Okay.
So thank you all. Thank you very much. I think we had a very interesting session. It was a difficult book, not a book that we will all agree with, but I think it sets us thinking. And Shireen, why don't you write a book report for the Daily Star? I think because you did a very good job, Shireen, and I think it would be good to write. I know you have written it up, so just finalize it, and we can send it off to Sohana Manzoor, or to there is this, what's her name, Sarah Anjumbari of the book review page. So there is. I think we should. I think you worked very hard on preparing this, and I think you should publish it for a wider audience. So thank you, everyone. Thank you very, very much, and keep safe, all of you. I'm going to stop recording. Keep safe, all of you. Khuda Hafiz.
Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you.